All right. So we're going to continue our Unlocking Revelation seminar. This is our classroom version, so it'll be a little bit more informal. And we're going to look at some more detailed topics, so we can have interactions, classroom style. So if you guys have questions, you can stop me. If you have some comments, that's fine. We can do that in this setting. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off by looking at the book of Revelation, but just an overview, a summary of the whole thing, basically. The pieces of it, and I'm going to focus mainly on the first half, and you'll see why as we go along. Does everyone have Bibles?
Yes.
Everyone's got at least an electronic version or something? Okay. I got my electronic one there.
I think I have this Bible.
Over the pew? Where?
Oh, I get it. That's okay. I can use my phone. Oh, yeah, no worries.
Okay. So just to start off, just by way of introduction, let's just open up to Revelation chapter 1.
Alright.
And
Sean? Do you have a Bible?
Okay.
oh yeah, he could use one.
Huh?
So, do we have an extra for him?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, he can use this.
Get 2 or 3. In the pews downstairs.
So-
Oh, here.
So let's start with Revelation chapter 1, verse 3. Can somebody read verse 3 for us, please? Revelation 1 and verse 3.
Sure, why
Please, Matt.
not? Blessed is he who reads and those who hear the words of this prophecy, and keep those things which are written in it, for the time is near.
Sorry. Thank you. I didn't know a trumpet was going to start us earlier. We're not supposed to get to that until chapter 7 and 8.
The trumpets.
The trumpets aren't supposed to start yet. Thank you. So notice that there's only 2 books that are specifically pointed out in the Bible that we are told specifically, hey, read this book. Of course, that doesn't mean we shouldn't read everything. We should read everything in the Bible. But there's 2 in particular that were pointed out and said, hey, read this. And one of them is the book of Revelation. It says we're blessed if we read. And what else? He that reads and hear it and keep those things that are written, right? So there's a special blessing given to those who read the book of Revelation. The other one, this is interesting. Go to Matthew chapter 24 and verse 15. Matthew 24:15. You can hold your finger in Revelation because we're definitely coming back there. Matthew 24:15. This is Jesus speaking. This is the prophecy on the Mount of Olives.
15.
Yes. You want to read it? Matthew 24:15.
Therefore, when you see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet, standing in the holy place, whoever reads, let him understand.
So we're told there to read and understand the book of Daniel as well. So those are 2 books that we're told, hey, pay attention to these particular books. And a lot of commentaries have recognized that Daniel and Revelation they're like sister books. Daniel is like the Old Testament version of Revelation, where it's very apocalyptic, end-time prophecy focused. And we'll look at that as we go along, but we're going to focus on Revelation today. Okay, just wanted to point that out quickly. There's a blessing to read and understand the book of Revelation. So here's a couple of facts about the book itself. It was written about 90 AD, give or take. And even secular scholars admit that. We know this is a fact. You know, people who don't even believe the Bible admit, yeah, it was written then. We know it was written about 90 AD. We have copies of it around that time. There's no doubt about it. And it was written by the Apostle John. You guys know anything that was different about the Apostle John compared to the other apostles?
You were the youngest.
He was the youngest at the beginning.
Yeah.
And then, but 90 AD, that should tell you a hint there.
How old you were?
He was the last remaining one.
Right.
All the others had been martyred, and he lived the longest. And we don't have record of him actually being martyred. We know that they attempted to. Tradition tells us they attempted to kill him, but he wasn't killed, and so he lived the longest. So that's interesting. And he was in exile on the island of Patmos because of preaching They put him on this island. And that's where he wrote the book. And that's recorded in Revelation 1 verse 9. It tells us that he was on the Isle of Patmos when he wrote it. The book of Revelation is 404 verses. And of those 404 verses, 270 at least are either direct quotes or paraphrases from the Old Testament. So that means when you read this book, you need to understand what it's quoting, because it's constantly quoting the Old Testament. It's been described like a mosaic of the Old Testament scriptures, just pieces of Old Testament all put together into one book. And so the imagery is very Old Testament, okay? So how does the book of Revelation work? What's the point of it? Well, it's largely symbols. Let me give you guys an example of what I mean by that. Turn to Matthew chapter 13. Matthew chapter 13, starting in verse 36. The screen's nice and clear. You guys can read that from here?
Yeah.
Okay. Matthew 13, verse 36. And I'll go ahead and read that. Let's see here. Let me read King James. Okay. Oops. Yeah, 13:36. So this is the parable of the, one of the parables of the sower. Let's see. Starting in verse 36. Then Jesus sent the multitude away and went into the house, and his disciples came unto him, saying, Declare unto us the parable of the tares of the field. So this is the parable, I don't know if you guys remember, but of a man, he sows seeds in a field, and while he sleeps, an enemy comes in and puts weeds in there, or tares. Okay? You guys remember that parable? Mm-hmm. And wake up in the morning and his servants ask, where did these weeds come from? And he says, oh, an enemy did it. So after Jesus sent the multitude away, good morning, the disciples want to know, what does this parable mean? Now this is a good object lesson here. This teaches you basically how the parables and the prophecies in the Bible work. The multitude hears the parable and they hear the symbols. But those who really want to know more go to Jesus and ask him, what does this mean? And his disciples get the interpretation. That's how Revelation works as well. The multitude of people just read it on the surface and they don't know what it means. And then those who want to know more keep seeking and Jesus explains what it means. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So here it is, Jesus explains, verse 37. He answered and said unto them, He that soweth the good seed is the Son of Man. So Jesus is compared to a farmer sowing seeds. The field is the world. The good seed are the children of the kingdom, and the tares, or the weeds, are the children of the wicked one. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, and the reapers are the angels. As therefore the tares are gathered and burned in the fire, so shall it be at the end of this world. Okay, so we have an example of a parable, symbols, and then the symbols are interpreted. You guys see that? Mm-hmm. That's how it works in prophecy. That's the pattern. So the pattern is you tell a story with symbols, and then you explain what those symbols mean. And only those who are paying attention, who want to look deep, will see, oh, this symbol means this. Everyone else will just see a story. What does that mean? And they'll walk away, and they won't get it. This is how God gets a message to his people without the majority of the world knowing what he's talking about. Does that make sense? Okay. Well, why do you guys think that is? What would be a good reason why God would do that? Any ideas?
I think that's a way to motivate a deeper study.
Absolutely.
I don't understand this, so I need to understand this, and then you go deeper.
Absolutely.
Into the word.
Absolutely. You know, when you meet somebody on a first date, you don't tell them everything about right away. You know.
You're supposed to.
Yeah. You're supposed to save a little, you
right.
know, and that causes people to want to know more, right?
Right.
Same idea. Jesus talks about burying treasure, and people, you dig for it and find it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. What's another reason? Think about the fact that we're dealing with kingdoms, and some of them were the kingdom that exists during that time. Like when John wrote Revelation,
Rome.
he talks about Rome in Revelation. He talks about Rome's fall. Why would you not want to say that openly and rather say it in code?
Persecution.
Absolutely. Do you think the Roman authorities would like to hear about a book going around, spreading around that says that their kingdom's going to fall? No. That would bring unnecessary trouble to the church. And so God puts it in code. So his people understand, but the world doesn't. And that's why, when you think about it, the code is the rest of the Bible. Remember I said it's over 400 verses, but almost 300 of those are Old Testament quotes. So those who know the Bible, the Christians, understand the code language. You see how that works? Okay. So let's see an example of this right at the beginning of the book of Revelation, in chapter 1, starting in verse 12. Okay. Revelation chapter 1, verse 12. And I'm just going to kind of read a couple of these verses here. I won't read the whole thing. This is John speaking. And I turned to see the voice that spake with me. And being turned, I saw 7 golden candlesticks. And in the midst of the 7 golden candlesticks was one like unto the Son of Man. Now you guys probably have the word son there is a capital S, because the translators understood this is talking about Jesus. And it describes him a bit, but I want you to notice in verse 16, it says, and he had in his right hand 7 stars, and out of his mouth went a sharp two-edged sword, and his countenance was as the sun shining in its strength. Okay? Jump down to verse 20. So far we've seen he saw 7 golden candlesticks, and the Son of Man was in the middle of them, and he had 7 stars in his hand. Now he's going to tell you what that means. Verse 20. The mystery of the 7 stars, which thou sawest in my right hand, and the 7 golden candlesticks. The 7 stars are the angels of the 7 churches, and the 7 candlesticks, which thou sawest, are the 7 churches. So do we need to guess what those symbols mean? No, it tells us, right? And that's really the essence of understanding Revelation, is just knowing where to see that the symbol is interpreted. If you know where to look, where it's interpreted, then the whole book just opens up fairly easily. So the candlesticks, and this is kind of an artist's depiction here of candlesticks, 7 candlesticks, they're a symbol of what?
Churches.
The churches. And the stars were a symbol of angels. Okay. So that's the pattern. Right there at the beginning of Revelation, it gives you a pattern. There's a symbol translated. Same thing throughout the rest of the book. Okay. Here's this quick overview of it. Just to kind of give you guys an outline. And if anybody would like after, I'm happy to share my slides if you want the notes. Chapters 1 through 3 is the 7 churches, or the 7 golden candlesticks, which is a symbol of the churches. Chapters 4 through 7 is the 7 seals. Chapters 8 through 11 is the 7 trumpets. And then in the center of the book is the climax of the book, chapters 12 through 14, and that's dealing with last day events, and really the focus of the book. The reason why that is in the center is because in the Old Testament they wrote in a chiastic structure. And in Greek times, they wrote in a chiastic structure as well, and that's where they got the idea. So a chiasm, that's where we get the Greek word for K, where we get it is it's like a pyramid on its side with a line. Well, just think the idea of a pyramid, right? Or even a cross, like an X like that. A chiasm, the way that they wrote back then, it was different than we write now. Nowadays, you're taught to write a 5-paragraph essay, right? You go to school. And what's the most important part of a 5-paragraph essay? What do you think?
Thesis.
The thesis, that's
Statement.
the thesis statement, and what else?
3 body paragraphs?
I wouldn't say it's the most important. I mean, it helps, but the thesis at the beginning, and what else?
Conclusion.
The conclusion. Those are the most important parts in our ideas. The introduction, what you grab people's attention with, and what's the conclusion. The middle part is really just supporting your ideas, right? And it's kind of, that's not the most important part. You could read the beginning and the conclusion and know the point, right? That's not how they wrote back then. Back then they wrote in a chiasm, and the way it worked was you would have the most important part was at the center. And the other parts, the supporting parts, were parallels. I could draw this on the board for you, but just imagine a pyramid, and the beginning and the ending is a parallel. The second part and the second to the last part's a parallel. The third part and the third to the last is a parallel. And then the center, that's the most important part, the climax of it. That's a chiastic structure. That's how it works in Revelation. The center of the book is really the climax. That's where all the major stuff's going down. Go ahead.
Where else is that style seen in other books, or is it?
It is. It's
Oh.
found throughout the Bible. I was looking at examples of this, and you could see it in just like in small passages. Even like a verse will have a chiasm in it, where the beginning of the verse and the end of the verse is a parallel, and the points in the middle. You could give, if you just look up chiastic structure Bible, you'll come up with dozens of examples of that. Yeah, people have recognized that for a long time. So it's all over. Okay, so and even like these sections are in chiasms. So the 7 churches is written in a chiasm, where the 4th one is the most important. The 1st and 7th are parallels, and so on. So that's an interesting side point. So chapters 15 through 19 is the fall or the judgment of Babylon. And I should have put Babylon in quotes there because we're not talking about literal Babylon. Most everything in Revelation is a symbol. It's a symbol. It's not literal Babylon. And then the chapter 20 is the millennium. And then 21 and 22 is the new heaven and the new earth. That's kind of the conclusion of it. Do you have a question?
No.
Oh, I thought I saw him. Okay. All right. So that's the really quick overview of it. Now I want you guys to notice something that I'm going to point out, and this is throughout the first half of the book. And that is this theme of the sanctuary in the book of Revelation. You guys remember what the sanctuary is?
Yeah.
From the Old Testament, the tabernacle that God had Moses construct in the wilderness, and later on it was made into a permanent temple. Okay, so we're going to see that as we walk through. Here's a couple pictures of it. It's in case you guys aren't too familiar with the idea. So this is kind of an overview of it, and basically it was a really nice tent in the Old Testament. They could take it down and put it back up, but it had a wall around the outside, which was just pillars and tent material. The entrance was on the east. You came in, you saw the altar, that's where they would burn the sacrifice. The lambs would be burnt there. And then there was a wash basin. The priests would wash their hands. And then the actual tabernacle itself was on the west. And it looked just like a simple tent from the outside. Actually, this makes it look a little fancier than it was. It had, the outer layer was animal skins. So it looked pretty simple on the outside. Hello.
Sorry.
Hey, you're fine. Please join us. Find a seat. There's some over here too. We're really just getting started. I had to set stuff up and kind of the intro. So now we're looking at the concept of the tabernacle in the book of Revelation. So here's some pictures. Here's some kind of artist depiction of it. So on the outside, if you were to see it, you would think this was a simple tent because it had animal skins on the outside. But when you went inside, this is kind of an artist depiction of if you were to take the veils off and see the inside, you would see that the walls were made to look like gold. And there was this beautiful golden lampstand on the inside, and all the jewels and all the treasures of it were on the inside. But on the outside, it looks simple. Now, the tabernacle is also a symbol of how we're supposed to be. On the outside, simple, but on the inside, God is supposed to be in there.
Amen.
And are supposed to have a character that's good on the inside, right?
Yeah.
And literally in the most holy place was the throne of God, the Ark of the Covenant. It was a symbol of his throne. The real one's in heaven, but the tabernacle was a replica, a miniature replica of what was supposed to be in heaven. Did you guys know that it was a miniature replica?
No.
That's in
Exodus.
Exodus 25. I believe it tells you to make everything according to the pattern shown in the mount. So it's after a pattern. So God is supposed to be in there, and it's God's throne inside the tabernacle, but on the outside it looks simple. Okay? Now there was multiple pieces of furniture inside this tabernacle. Here's kind of just a depiction of the different pieces of furniture. So you walk in on the east. By the way, the sun rises where? Rises in the east. And the pagans would always worship the sun toward the east, right? God set this up so that you are walking away from the east, walking in, and if you were to worship God, he was over here, you'd be worshiping with your back to the sun. So it's the opposite of paganism in that way. You walk in, you hit the altar of burnt offering, that's the first step, and then you come to the laver where the priest would wash, and then when you enter the tabernacle itself, there was 2 chambers. The first chamber is the holy place, and the second chamber is the most holy place. You guys have heard those terms before? That's what it is. When you walk in, you would see 7 golden candlesticks on this side, and the table of showbread on this side, which was just literally a table with bread on it for show. It's the table of showbread. That's what it was. But it was covered in gold. It's a very nice table. Then you had an altar of incense, and then a veil separating the two. And only the high priest went into the most holy place only once a year on the Day of Atonement. And then in the most holy place was the Ark of the Covenant, which was the throne of God. The 10 Commandments were inside that box. So that's the overview. Okay. Interesting, right? Again, just kind of a quick depiction. Now, what you will see as we walk through the book of Revelation is you will see it's literally as if God wants us to walk through the tabernacle as you're going through the book of Revelation. You'll see that as we go along. Here it is again, kind of labeled showbread, the candlesticks, the altar of incense. So 3 things in the first apartment, and then 1 piece of furniture in the second apartment. Okay. Oh, and here's kind of, if you were standing there, what would you see as you walked in? Those on each side, and that in the front, and then that veil. Okay. So, question. What do you guys think you would notice first when you walked into the holy place? What do you think?
The smell of incense?
Smell of incense? That's a good point. I didn't think of that. I was thinking visually, but that's a good point. What else? What do you think you would notice visually first when you walked in?
7 candlesticks.
You would notice the candlesticks first. Do you have a thought, Kalia?
The bread?
The bread? Yeah. Maybe if you were hungry, right?
It's a girl thing.
Yeah. Well, the idea is that where did the light come from in this room?
The candlesticks.
It's from the candlesticks.
It's a dark place.
It's a dark place. Other than those candlesticks, it's completely dark. So that would probably catch your eyes first.
Yeah,
The 7 golden candlesticks. What is the first section of the book of Revelation? The 7 golden candlesticks. You guys see the parallel?
Yeah.
So you walk in, boom, 7 golden candlesticks. You're literally walking through the sanctuary. So that's the first section. That's chapters 1 through 3 of Revelation, is the 7 golden candlesticks. And a lot of people don't notice this when they read Revelation, that it's the sanctuary theme is throughout it. And again, we're quoting the Old Testament. So the candlesticks themselves is also in a chiastic structure. I mentioned what that is again. And it's the idea that the central part is the most important. This is an artist's depiction of what it kind of looked like, the candlesticks. And you'll see it had a main stalk. That was the central idea, the central point. And then it literally was like this, where the two, the first and the last were connected, second and the sixth, third and the fourth, and then that one in the middle. So the 7 churches are also built in this chiastic structure. Okay, just to kind of give you, and I'm not going to spend time trying to explain why this is today. We'll do this on a later discussion. But I'm just going to tell you flat out what the interpretation is. And this is a classical interpretation. This is not something that is crazy. A lot of scholars, a lot of Bible scholars have understood this interpretation. But basically that the 7 churches is a depiction of the history of Christianity from the Apostles' Church, the time of the Apostles, up into the church in the last days. It just goes through the history of Christianity. Boom, 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 boom. So the middle one would be the church in the Middle Ages. The first church is the Apostles' Church, last church is the church at the end of time, and so forth. It just goes through 2,000 years of church history in 3 chapters. That's the basic idea. And it does it in symbolism, but once you see it, we'll go through that in a later study, and it becomes very clear what it's doing. So that's the idea. Again, I'm not going to try and, you guys kind of taking my word for it. You don't have to believe me on that. I haven't proved it to you, but I'm just kind of trying to give you the overview for now. And why do you think Jesus uses the symbol of a lampstand?
The light.
Churches of the light,
Yeah, Matthew 5, and we could look at the verse, but I'm sure you guys are familiar with it. Jesus says, "You are the light of the world." You know, what is it? No man lights a candlestick and puts it under a bushel, but he puts it on what? A lampstand. And then let your light so shine before men, right? So we are the light of the world. So the church is symbolized by the lampstands. Good morning. Glad you made it. Please join us. You okay? Yeah, escorted right to your seat. Thank you. Glad you could make it. So, and
So
the
that
other,
really is a very accurate symbol for the church. The church is supposed to
Absolutely.
be the light.
we're supposed to be the light, so we're symbolized by the
Yeah.
lampstands. Makes sense. Very simple
Iglesia,
symbol.
yeah.
This is interesting. If you notice, this is where Patmos was, this is where John was, right? And the 7 churches, which were 7, actually these were pretty minor, small churches in John's day, but they were real churches. And if you'll notice, the order of them is the exact order if you were to travel along this path here.
Is that
That's
a
the
lampstand?
order that he reads them in. What's that?
It looks like a lampstand.
It also is like that, kind of almost like that triangle structure, right? That same kind of, boom, boom, boom. And so you would travel like that. And so these churches also were a symbol of different eras in the Christian era. But they also were literal churches. It's multiple things at once. And that is the amazing thing about Revelation, is that there's multiple things going on at the same time. The same thing is true throughout the entire Bible. You read the Old Testament, and you read the story of Abraham and Isaac, and it really happened, right? It was a really real story that Abraham had to sacrifice his son, or was he about to, right? But what else is going on in that story? Is there more meaning to it? What did Isaac symbolize? Father willing to give up his only son? It was typology. It was a symbol as well. Abraham was the father. His name means father of nations, right? Isaac was the willing sacrifice. He's a symbol of Christ. And so you'll find that throughout the Old Testament, that there's multiple things going on at once. Multiple meanings. There's the on the surface meaning, and then there's a deeper one. And the same thing in Revelation. There's multiple things going on. And so it's only God can write like that. To tell 2 stories at once. So that's the idea. Okay, so that's the first section of Revelation. The next section is the 7 seals. What would you notice next as you walked into the tabernacle, right? Do you guys remember? On this side was the candlesticks. The next thing closest to you is the showbread on this side. And that's the next section. Revelation 4 through 7 is the 7 seals. And it's the seals is related with the showbread. Now this one is a little harder to see. On the 7 churches, it's obvious because it just says, hey, these are the 7 churches. There's 7 candlesticks. And that's an obvious parallel to the Old Testament, 7 candlesticks. This one's a little bit more, how do you see it? Well, there's a way to see the table of showbread there. I'm not going to try and show you guys that because it takes some time. But the basic idea is this. When you read the 7 seals, what it's talking about is a book that has 7 seals on it, right? And the question is, who is going to be worthy to open the seals and read the book? When you read chapter 4, that's the whole idea of it. They're trying, who's worthy to read it? And only the Lamb is worthy to open the seals and read the book. Well, what is a symbol of a book in the Bible? Hello. Please join us. Even more chairs. Almost full. Well, in the Bible, bread is a symbol for the Word. You guys know that, right? Do I need to explain that one? Jesus says, man shall not live by bread alone, but by every word that proceeds from the mouth of God. So when we see a section that's all about a book, it's very similar to the bread. That's the idea.
So it means say the bread is the bread of life. That's the word of God.
Absolutely.
So,
Absolutely.
as a Christian, we are not only the light of the world, but how could we be a light by reading the book?
We
Reading
need
the
the
word
bread.
of God, because we have nothing to share if we don't read.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's the idea of the 7 seals. There's a couple interludes, and these are important to notice. I can prove this real quick here. Let's go to Revelation. So, Revelation chapter 4. Does anyone have Bibles that have a title at the top of the chapters?
Or Revelation.
Do you guys have titles or like
Yeah.
headings above
Yeah.
the chapters?
Okay.
Yeah.
What's your heading? Jerome, I see you're nodding your head. What's the heading of
Throne
chapter
room
4?
of heaven.
What's that?
The throne room of heaven.
Throne room of heaven. And then what about chapter 5? What's the heading
The
there?
Lamb takes a scroll.
The Lamb takes the scroll. So again, we see this idea of a scroll, right? Or a book. And it's the scroll with 7 seals on it. So what you see in the throne room of God in chapter 4, and then it continues to study this same idea in chapter 5, there's this book. So look at verse 2, chapter 5, verse 2. Could somebody read that?
Chapter 5.
Chapter 5, verse 2. Please.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, got it.
Okay. Then I saw a strong angel proclaiming with a loud voice, "Who is worthy to open the scroll and to loose its seals?"
Okay, so we see the idea of the scroll right away in chapter 5. But we don't start opening the seals until chapter 6. So chapter 5 is kind of the topic has been introduced, but the seals aren't opened yet until chapter 6, starting in verse 1. And you guys will probably see that if you look at what's your heading on chapter 6, Jerome?
First seal.
The first seal? Alright, okay, and then it just goes through the seals, right? So the seals go through all through chapter 6. When you get to chapter 7, it stops opening seals. We've opened up to 6 of them, I believe, at that point. And then we have an interlude, which is the 144,000, and they get the seal of God. Does that sound like a similar idea? Previously we talked about seals, now we have people getting a seal. Similar idea, right? So you guys see the parallels? This is an interlude. Chapter 7 is an interlude. And then when you get to chapter 8, verse 1, can somebody read 8, verse 1?
Go ahead.
When the Lamb broke the seventh seal on the scroll, there was silence throughout heaven for about half an hour.
Okay, so the 7 seals don't actually end until chapter 8, verse 1. I think whoever did the chapter divisions here, it was kind of they kind of messed up there. They should have done a chapter division after that verse, because that ends the 7 seals. And then verse 2 starts with the trumpets. So what we see is that chapter 6, you have the first 6 seals. Chapter 7, there's an interlude, and then the beginning of chapter 8 is the 7th seal. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So chapter 7 really is almost like an intermission in between the 6th and 7th seal.
That's right.
So it's still in that theme of 7 seals. And that's one of the things you should notice as you're reading these things is, why is this whole chapter stuck in between the 6th and 7th seals? It's on the same topic. That's why. Does that make sense? So there's an interlude, chapters 4 and 7, that go with that section, but they don't follow the flow of the 7 seals. Again, here's the quick interpretation without proving it. We'll go through this on another day. This is just an overview for now. But this again depicts the history of Christianity from the time of the apostles until the end. It just comes at it from a different angle. But it goes through basically the same time period. That's what it does. Okay, next section. What would you notice next? There's 3 pieces of furniture in the tabernacle. We've seen the first 2 that were the closest to you as you walked in. There was a far one.
The smell of incense and the incense.
Altar.
Yeah.
Altar of incense. Yep, that was the farthest thing in the room from you, and that's the third thing that we encounter as you walk through the book of Revelation. So chapters 8 through 11, the theme is the altar of incense and the 7 trumpets. So where do we see that? Let's go to chapter 8. And verse 2, it mentions the 7 trumpets. But then, can somebody read verse 3 and 4, please?
Then another angel having a gold censer came and stood at the altar. He was given much incense, that he should offer it with the prayers of all the saints upon the golden altar which was before the throne. And the smoke of incense with the prayers of the saints ascended before God from the angel's hand.
Thank you. So, right at the beginning of the 7 trumpets, we have the altar of incense mentioned. Isn't this interesting? Have you guys ever noticed this before? The idea that as you walk through Revelation, you get to see the different pieces of the furniture in the tabernacle. Isn't that interesting?
Yes.
It just mentions them one by one, and we'll see the last one's coming. But so this is clearly the altar of incense. This angel has a golden censer. Let me give you here's a picture, an artist's depiction of what the high priest in the Old Testament looked like, his outfit. I don't know if he had a scowl like that, but but that was the basic idea of the outfit. And he had a censer, and the altar of incense there, and he had a censer of incense as well. And so that's the idea. So this Revelation, when it talks about this angel having incense, and he's offering it before the throne. Now this is a cool thing. Let's see if I have a picture of this. We'll go back there. The incense, the altar of incense was right before the veil. Meaning on the other side of that veil was what?
The lampstand.
The ark.
The Ark of the Covenant. In the most holy place, that was the Ark of the Covenant. And the Ark of the bless you. The Ark of the Covenant was what else was that?
The law.
The law was in there, but what's on the top of it? What's the seat?
Oh, the mercy seat.
The mercy
That was the
seat.
throne of God. And the Hebrews believed, and God said in the Old Testament, I will meet with you there between the cherubim on the Ark of the Covenant. That was the symbol of his throne. God's presence was in that, behind that veil. So the priest would go up that far and not go in, except once a year. But he would burn incense right before that. Now you can imagine how it would work. The incense would go up over the veil and into where God was. Now this is a beautiful symbol of prayer. Notice again, let's read these verses again. Actually, let's just read the end of verse 3. It says that he should offer it with the prayer of the saints, prayers of the saints, upon the golden altar which is before the what? The throne, right? That's where God is, inside the most holy place. And the smoke of the incense which came with the ascended up before God out of the angel's hands. So incense is a symbol of prayer, because incense goes into God's presence when we can't. Prayer goes to God, even though we can't be directly in his presence. We don't go straight to heaven, right? But we can send our prayers there. You guys see how that works? And our prayers come to God like a sweet smelling aroma. Isn't that beautiful symbolism? And I could give you multiple verses on this. In Psalms it talks about, let my prayers be like the morning and evening incense. You know? And then in Luke it talks about how when John the Baptist, his father was ministering in the temple. Remember when he got the vision of the angel that he was going to have a son and he couldn't speak anymore? It says he was doing it that he was giving incense. He was burning incense, and it says he was doing it at the time when everyone was praying outside. So the Jews understood prayer and incense are like this. And that's clear in Revelation chapter 8. Okay? So let's go back here. So chapter 8 through 11 is the 7 trumpets, but the piece of furniture that is linked to it is what? The altar of incense. So we have the 7 trumpets with the altar of incense. Why? Trumpets, what does trumpets symbolize in the Bible? What do you guys think? It's kind of on the screen, but you have any ideas?
It says judgment.
Yeah, it's on there.
Yeah, it's on the screen, yeah, but it's a symbol of judgment. And we don't have to read this, but do you guys remember the story of Jericho?
Yes.
Joshua and Jericho? What did they do when they wanted to conquer Jericho?
Circle around.
They marched around it once a day, and at the end of marching, what did they do?
Blew
Blew the trumpet.
Blew the trumpet. And they did that for 6 days, and on the 7th day,
7 times.
they marched 7 times, and they blew the trumpet one more time,
And then
and they made
the
a loud
wall of
shout,
Jericho
and the walls
fell.
fell. And so if you were inside Jericho, what do you think a trumpet and an army marching around your city meant?
Judgment.
Wow.
Judgment's
Judgment.
coming. It's not going to be pretty, you know? It's judgment against the wicked. That's what it means. In the Old Testament, when you read the stories of wars, there's almost always, before they go to war, they would blow the trumpet and go to war. You know? That's the idea.
It's like the same thing as Gideon and the 300.
Absolutely. Yeah.
with the trumpet and the pitcher.
Blow the trumpets, make a loud sound.
It's also interesting because the second coming of Christ is also, there's also a trumpet.
Absolutely.
Yes.
It's called the last trumpet.
The last trump.
Absolutely. When the last trumpet sounds, and Jesus comes as a conquering king, and the wicked are punished. So it's, again, a symbol of judgment, war. Now, there was an interlude in chapters,
10 and 11.
we'll get to that in a second. Why do you think that trumpets and the judgment, the 7 trumpets is about judgment, why do you think judgment and prayer are linked together? Any ideas? Why would judgment against the wicked be linked with prayer in the altar of incense?
Because in the Old Testament, there's the atonement.
That's true. That's true. But why is it linked with prayer? Good question, right?
Yeah.
So what's this theme God is trying to depict in these chapters? Go to Revelation chapter 6 and verse 10.
Joshua, I just remembered something, but I don't know if this
Go
is
ahead.
related.
Yeah.
I just remembered a verse that says, "For the prayer of the righteous availeth much."
Absolutely. Absolutely. What do you think? What is it? Where are you going with that?
Well, you know,
What do you think? I mean, it's a good idea, but we're,
Continue.
in continuation with the righteous, you know,
What are they
judgment is
praying
coming.
for?
Judgment is coming.
do the righteous ever pray for judgment?
We're-
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can read through the Psalms over and over. How long, Lord, is it the wicked
Yeah.
going to prevail, right? Those are prayers of the righteous over and over. So
Isn't
linking
it-
prayer with judgment,
right.
absolutely. So I think you have a good point, right, this. Revelation chapter 6, verse 10. Here's the prayers of some of the saints. These are martyrs here. And they cried with a loud voice, saying, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, dost thou not judge and avenge our blood on them that dwell on the earth?" So you can see why prayer and judgment are linked together. God is answering the prayers of his people by judging Babylon.
In the last day, we're going to pray that.
Yeah?
It's too
We pray,
long.
I mean, if you pray for deliverance from your enemies, the only way that can happen is, well,
Is
the
to
enemies
pray.
have got to get punished. So that's how they're linked. We saw that there was an interlude in the 7 seals. There's also an interlude in the 7 trumpets. Chapters 10 and 11 are an interlude between the 6th and the 7th trumpet, I believe. And let me show you. Let's see here. Chapter 9, if you just look at the headings of chapter 9, you'll see this is still part of the 7 trumpets. When you get to chapter 10, it's a different topic, and there's no trumpets mentioned. Chapter 11, again, no trumpets, until you get to the end of chapter 11. And then verse 15, the 7th angel sounds his trumpet. You see that? So in between the 6th and 7th trumpet is chapter 10 and 11. Isn't that interesting? That tells you that chapter 10 and 11 are also in the theme of the trumpets. And then this kind of leads us to a segue of our next topic. What would be the next piece of furniture in the ark, or in the temple? I kind of gave it away just now.
And the ark, yeah.
Okay, so we saw the first 3. The next one you would see, the last piece is the ark. Well, that is exactly the next piece that's mentioned. In Revelation chapter 11, somebody read verse 19.
And the temple of God, am I right?
Mm-hmm.
And the temple of God was opened in heaven, and there was seen in his temple the ark of his testament. And there were lightnings and voices and thunderings and an earthquake and great hail.
Interesting, right? So I'm not making this up when I said that the temple on earth was a symbol of the one in heaven, because this is a temple of God in heaven, and it's opened, and what's in there? The Ark of the Covenant, or the Ark of the Testament. It's the same idea. And it would indeed have to be open, because you would not normally see the Ark of the Testament until that veil is opened, right? So here we have the last piece of furniture. As we walk through Revelation, we get to that last piece of furniture in the end of chapter 11, just as we're getting to the climax, the center of the book. The Ark of the Covenant is mentioned.
Very clearly, he's connecting it with lightnings, thunderings, earthquakes. This is Mount Sinai, when
Yeah,
When God descended
yeah,
and gave the law.
that, absolutely. And what was in the Ark of the Covenant? The Ten Commandments.
Commandments.
Absolutely. Okay, that's a very good point. Okay, so the next thing you would notice would be this Ark of the Covenant. Here's an artist depiction, and it had two angels on either side. It was basically a golden box with the Ten Commandments on it. Two angels on either side, and the presence of God would appear in between those two angels on the what was called the mercy seat. The Bible calls it the mercy seat. That's the lid of the covenant. It was called the mercy seat. The lid of that box. So this is the theme that's mentioned at the end of chapter 11. So that introduces chapters 12 through 14, is this idea of the Ark of the Covenant. Now we're going into the idea of the throne of God. The Ten Commandments is part of that theme. Controversy about the law, all these things is the last day events. This is the climax of the book. Okay, let's see if we can go through this quickly, this final point here. The focus in this chapter is the Dark Ages, which is interesting, that kind of middle area, that middle period in church history, and last day events. And then the second coming is depicted at the end of chapter 14. I'm going to give you a few verses here. I'm going to go over this kind of quickly. So this is from Revelation chapter 12. There's 2 verses, and time periods are mentioned. I just want you to notice the time period for now. It mentions 1,260 days. You guys remember that from our prophecy seminar, 1,260 days?
Mm-hmm.
In verse 14, it mentions a time period again, and now it's used a different language. It says a time, times, and half a time. Now what is that? A time, in the Old Testament, you can read this in Daniel chapter 4, I believe it is. A time was a year. So a time is 1 year. What would be times? That would be plural.
2 times.
The smallest you can have and have a plural would be 2. And then half a time. So 1 plus 2 plus a half is 3.5 years. Now it just so happens, right, that 3.5 years, if you take that perfect 360-day year, which is what's used in prophecy, that kind of ideal year that you find, well, it's found in the Old Testament in the story of Noah, an example, Noah's flood. But if you take 360 days, times it by 3.5 years, you get 1,260. Here's another time period mentioned, Revelation 13 verse 15, 40 and 2 months. And it's the same idea. It's a little distracting. 42 months. Now, what is 42 months times a perfect prophetic month, 30 days in a month? 42 times 30, what's that?
1,000.
1,000.
Math whiz, you didn't have it. I was
1,260.
hoping on you. It's 1,260. It's the exact same time period. Mentioned over and over and over again.
But it is in days.
But it's a symbol. Most everything in Revelation is a symbol, and we're told in Ezekiel chapter 4 and Numbers 14, we don't have time to go over this now, but a symbol, a day is a year in prophecy. So we're talking 1,260 years. This was the Dark Ages, the Middle Ages. This time period is mentioned over and over again in this section. Go ahead.
It's kind of interesting because the book of Daniel does the same thing, you know. The
Yes, it
symbols are different, like the animals and then the image. But
Yeah.
it's talking about the same thing.
It's the same thing, but using
More
different language.
details.
Yeah. And you can tell that this is not a normal time period, because who tells time like that? Who would ever say 3.5 years by saying 1,260 days?
No one.
Obviously, it's trying to point you to the fact that this is something special about this. This is a symbol. So this is this 1,260 year period. It was the Dark Ages. We don't have time to prove this right now. You don't have to take my word for it. We'll go through it another day. But it was this time period from 538 to 1798 AD. That Middle Ages of church history. That's one of the focuses of this section of chapters 12 through 14. So notice this. We have a focus on the Dark Ages, those kind of Middle Ages and the end of time. Revelation at the end of chapter 13, the mark of the beast is mentioned. Revelation 14, the first half of it, is the final message, a warning against the mark of the beast. Right? So that's obviously a final message, because the mark of the beast is the last day, right before the end. And then the second coming is depicted in chapter 14. You see how that works? So we got the Dark Ages, Mark of the Beast, final warning, boom, second coming.
Yep.
This is the climax of the book. This is when Jesus is depicted coming on the clouds in chapter 14 at the second half of it. But that's in the middle of the book, right? That's the climax. Okay. Another quick point, and we'll close here in a second. How do we get closer to God? Let's read Psalm 77, verse 13. Psalm 77, verse 13. I know this has kind of been a lot of info. That's why we record these and put them on YouTube so you guys can watch it again later. Psalm 77, verse 13. How do we get closer to God? What is the pathway to get closer to God? Somebody read that for us.
Your way, O God, is in the sanctuary. Who is so great a God as our God?
Absolutely, yeah. So what is God's way? It's found where?
Sanctuary.
In the sanctuary. Notice this. God is visual, and he knows that we are visual learners. So he gives us a visual object lesson to see how to get close to him. You enter here, and this door. By the way, Jesus says, I am the door, and he is the way as well, right? But he calls himself the door as well. And you're supposed to enter in through him. Which door symbolizes Jesus? The whole thing symbolizes Jesus, actually. You come in, and where do you want to get? God's over here, right? So this is literally a depiction of how you get closer to God. That's what the Old Testament sanctuary is. It's a shame that we don't read it because it teaches you, and it symbols how to get close to him. So he's here, you're entering here. What's the first thing you got to do? You come to the altar of burnt offering. What do you think that symbolizes?
This Jesus is
There's a dead lamb on there, right? That's the cross. That's the first step. You come in through Jesus and boom, right away you need to accept his sacrifice at the cross. That's Christianity first step, right? What's the next step? Then you have this laver of water. What do you think water symbolizes?
Maybe when he died, he cleansed our sins. So maybe.
Absolutely, cleanse our sins, so it's cleaning. I like the way you're thinking, absolutely. There's an act as well that Christians go through. Baptism, that's the next step. So you accept Christ, and then you're baptized, and then you enter the tabernacle, you enter the church. The whole thing is a symbol of God's sanctuary, the church. And there's three things here that prepare you to actually get close to the presence of God. One of them is the lampstand, which is a symbol of what? The candlesticks is a symbol of what?
The Holy Spirit.
No.
Church.
The church. So church helps prepare you, it's one of these three things, to get close to God. Church. Going to church helps prepare you to get close to God, right?
Yes.
Also sharing your light, right?
Sharing your light, witnessing, absolutely. What about this? This is the table of showbread. What does bread symbolize? The Word. So reading your Bible helps you get closer to God, right? What else? What's the alternate sense? Prayer. Prayer helps you get closer to God. So these three things, you stay in here for the whole year because you only access into the most holy place at the end of the year, in the Jewish year. But you stay here all year, right?
I think not just the prayer, but mediator Jesus Christ.
Well, yeah, Jesus has to pray for you as well. Absolutely. But the idea is that these three things, church, Bible study, and prayer, are the things that are going to get you ready to meet God. That's the idea. So this whole thing is a symbol of how we get closer to God. Does that make sense? Very simple object lesson.
It's interesting how the New Testament is arranged like that too.
The New Testament's also arranged like that.
The Gospels are the altar, and
Yeah, absolutely.
and then the epistles of Paul and Peter are like
You're absolutely right.
preparation, and then the Revelation.
Yeah, it's the most
holy.
revealing.
But the second compartment, the most holy place, that will be coming when Jesus comes.
Access
That's
to it
glorification
is at the end. Yeah, where you actually meet God.
So we are on the sanctification
We're at the
process.
point right now where we're getting ready to meet God.
And
those three things help.
Yeah, and out of the holy place, because when you enter the door, that's the justification process.
Yes,
until you're being baptized. And when you enter to the holy place, that is your sanctification.
Absolutely.
When Jesus comes, that's your glorification.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yep. So again, we'll close with, oh, go ahead.
So where do you get baptized? I mean, would you just get baptized here at the church? I mean.
Yes, absolutely, yeah. You know, different people like to get baptized in different places. Some
Ocean.
people like to go
Yeah.
have something special in the ocean or something, and that's, you know, there's nothing wrong with that. But
But
we do have a
baptismal-
baptistry, we do have a baptistry here though. Yeah, absolutely. So, again, the quick overview is the first section, dealing with the 7 churches, 7 candlesticks. Next section, 7 seals. Next section, the 7 trumpets. And then the center of the book is dealing with last day events. And we didn't go a lot into this other than giving the overview of it, but we will have a whole day on some of these chapters here. The fall of Babylon, the judgment of Babylon happens in chapters 15 through 19, the millennium in chapter 20, and then the new earth and the new heaven at the end of it. So that's the quick overview of Revelation in, you know, about 45 minutes. Just the basics. I'm not trying to prove some of the things I said, I just had to try and go through it quickly. You guys have any final questions before we close? Good questions, by the
So
way.
you're gonna upload the deck to your YouTube channel so people can
Yes.
access it?
These videos will be, you're talking about the slides?
The actual, yeah, the,
I'll put it on Dropbox. I'll
oh,
put it on Dropbox and I'll put a link on the videos, on the YouTube, on Dropbox. I'm not sure how to put it on YouTube, so, yeah. And tonight, we're going to continue our Unlocking Revelation class at 7. It'll be the same topics we did before, but we'll do one topic a week. So at 7 o'clock and every Saturday night from here on out. Who would like to volunteer with the prayer?
Okay.